lot of right-wing refugees, people fleeing from anarchist atrocities, from the extreme left, arrived in Gibraltar. So there were a lot of very right-wing pro-Francoist people to be found in the hotels in Gibraltar. But the ordinary people, the working class of Gibraltar, and of course many of the people who worked in Gibraltar came in every day from the Campo de Gibraltar and roundabout, were of course supporters of the Republic, and so they were the ones who, many went and volunteered and fought for the Republic. So one's got to have this sense that in a way Gibraltar reflected, it was like a mini reflection of what was happening all over Spain.
We only know who we are by remembering where we come from. It is absolutely essential that we remember the days in the 1930s. In fact, in 1936, 80 years ago, less than 100 years ago, when Gibraltar was flooded with refugees. Especially today, when we see on our screens how people are running from the war affecting the Middle East, we can see in what was happening then the same sort of movement of people, the refugees that took cover and shelter in Gibraltar.
But I think when we look back and when we look at this exhibition that's going on here today, I think we can see that actually there was a lot more involvement between Gibraltar and Spain. On one level, of course, this was practical. The refugees who were coming across the border and were being housed, many of them left-wing refugees, and several hundred of those had to stay after the Spanish Civil War had ended. But also right-wing refugees as well, who were also accommodated not only by the colonial authorities, but also by prominent families in Gibraltar as well. So there was a practical interaction there between Gibraltar and Spain. But also the politics, was very keenly felt. It's traditionally been thought by historians of Gibraltar that almost from the start of the Civil War, people moved away from Spanish political ideas. But of course we can see so many of those ideas carrying on in Gibraltar after the Second World War, things the Republic stood for, such as secular education, anti-militarism, anti-colonialism, land reform, all were things that people in Gibraltar campaigned on after the Second World War. So I think the thing that we have to say is, rather than this representing a period where Gibraltar and Spain moved away from each other, actually it represented a period where the two moved much more closer together in many ways.
Civil War was from 1936 to 1939. Basically it's because we feel as a union that we had a specific role to play during the Spanish Civil War, our predecessor, the Transport and General Workers Union, but also because there's been a huge amount of Gibraltarians which we feel deserve some credit for having, in one way or another, contributed in making the whole situation come to light. When the war exploded, Gibraltar in itself was also divided into political rivalry. In Gibraltar you had at the time a fascist party, you had people in Gibraltar who supported the nationalists or supported the fascists, and people who supported the Republican movement and the trade unions in Spain. The trade union movement and the people of Gibraltar took a particular position historically in 1936. And the big question here is, why haven't we as a people, as a society, in the history books, told the history of these individuals that gave everything they had for democracy in Spain? And this is, I think, what is the aim of Unite and what we're trying to do today.
The role of the British trade union movement during the Spanish Civil War was, in the main, pro-Republican. The rank and file of the trade unions helped the Spanish Republic in all kinds of ways, and I mean their entire families, their wives as well as male workers. That took the form of fundraising for vehicles, for medical aid, and of course it also took the form of those volunteers who either went to fight with the international brigades, or in the case of women, who went to serve in the Republican medical services.
Support for the Republic was sustained throughout the Civil War as the Transport and General Workers Union, later Unite, worked hard to support refugees in Gibraltar and to campaign on behalf of the legitimate Spanish government.
Mis palabras para ahí van a ir en la dirección de hacer un reconocimiento mutuo en las relaciones históricas entre los trabajadores y trabajadoras del campo de Gibraltar, trabajadoras y trabajadores españoles y sus sindicatos, y las trabajadoras y los trabajadores de Gibraltar y sus sindicatos, ¿no? Que en unos momentos para nosotros muy duros, los más trágicos con diferencia de la historia reciente de nuestro país, que fue la sublevación del general Franco. En la sublevación del general Franco, los sublevados ocuparon y provocaron asesinatos, represión en el campo de Gibraltar, en Algeciras, en la línea.
The reason why the military uprising was so horrendously violent, particularly in the south of Spain, was precisely because of the scale of opposition that the military uprising was likely to meet. So that when the conspirators were planning and the instructions were sent out to the various military commanders, those instructions actually specified that there should be a massive level, an intense level of violence, that terror was necessary in order to paralyse the enemy, because of course the enemy, the left in Spain, particularly in the south, was numerically colossal by comparison with the relatively small number of military officers who were taking part in the revolt.
Que los sindicatos de Gibraltar en aquellos días, en aquellas semanas, en aquellos meses y años tan duros que vivió nuestro país, jugaron un papel encomiable. Es decir, la solidaridad sin pedir nada a cambio, la generosidad mostrada por el pueblo trabajador a través de sus sindicatos en primera línea, sirvió primero para salvar la vida de varios miles de personas que de otra manera la hubieran perdido. Evitaron la deportación de refugiados, porque hay que recordarlo, ¿no? Las autoridades de Gibraltar en aquel momento tenían una posición más favorable al régimen fascista que estaba intentando y al final lo logró acabar con la República Democrática Española, pero sin embargo la ciudadanía de Gibraltar, con los sindicatos a la cabeza, adoptó una posición muy favorable a la República y sobre todo de defensa de las personas que se vieron obligadas a abandonar sus casas, sus tierras, sus lugares, sus familias y encontraron aquí el cobijo que su país no les daba, ¿no? Creo que es muy importante esta contribución que desde Gibraltar se hace.
But it got me thinking on the way over here that I've spent almost half my life researching the history of Gibraltar, and I don't regret a moment of it, frankly. And I can't really summarise half a lifetime's work in the space of a few minutes this evening, but I've been profoundly interested in Gibraltar's historic relations with Spain, and particularly the local relations between Gibraltar and the Campo de Gibraltar. And as such, quite naturally, my work very quickly took me to this period that we're discussing today, the years of the Spanish Second Republic and the Civil War, and how profoundly those years influenced Gibraltarian society. And I'm not going to repeat a lot of the material that Chris used earlier, but suffice to say, I am convinced that this was a defining moment in Gibraltarian history, as indeed it was in the history of many European societies. I can't then summarise so much of the work that I've done in books and articles and so forth. And instead what I want to do tonight, very briefly, is offer you a few personal vignettes, stories of Gibraltarians or adopted sons of Gibraltar who found themselves for one reason or another caught up in the events of the Spanish Civil War.
During the Civil War, we can see numerous occasions where Gibraltarians offered moral or practical support to one side or the other. In 1938, when a Republican destroyer, the José Luis Díaz, put into Gibraltar for repairs. Workers in the dockyard laboured around the clock to shore up the damaged vessel and did so without being paid. By contrast, in the same year, a number of Gibraltarians from the entrepreneurial community, Joseph Amossi, Joseph Bertrand, Peter Russo, and James Andrew Speed, and their wives went to Spain to attend a rally which was addressed by Queipo de Llano, the military commander of the region, who appeared at the rally flanked by two members of the Nazi Secret Service.
Of course, the most direct way that anyone could get involved in the Spanish Civil War was by going and fighting in it. And as we've heard tonight, tens of thousands of people from all over the world went to fight in Spain, primarily, though not exclusively, on the side of the Spanish Republic. They saw the events in Spain, the battles in Spain, as the battles of the age. And there were different viewpoints, of course there were, but people went to Spain to fight on either side because they genuinely believed that what was going on was a fight between dictatorship and democracy, between fascism and communism, between tradition versus modernity, religion versus secularism, and so forth. One man who certainly did see the front line, though not, it has to be said, as a fighter, was the Gibraltarian trade union leader Agustin Huart. And we've heard a lot about Huart. The exhibition again does a marvellous job in telling us about Agustin Huart. And I'm also delighted to have picked up a copy of this wonderful book that's now been produced on Huart's life and his commitment to the Republic. And I'm really looking forward to reading that on my way home. I could give you an entire lecture about Huart. I'm not going to, you'll be glad to know. But suffice to say, this man is a very interesting historical figure and a really key personality in the development of Gibraltar and Gibraltarians politically.
Agustin Huart is my great-grandfather, and as a child I used to hear my grandmother saying, you know, what an important public figure he was, the things that he did to contribute to Gibraltar society, and as I grew older I found myself intrigued by it, and I started reading about Gibraltar books and history, and I found that there was very little about that period, certainly the interwar periods. I think what I found was that when I was looking at secondary sources, at least textbooks and materials and things like that, there was a lot written on, from the evacuation onwards, and then also, Lord Nelson, the Battle of Trafalgar, the sieges, but very little in that short little period of time, which I find was a fascinating period, because we had obviously the Spanish Civil War, we had a period where the city council was born in the early 20s, and where, if you like, the Gibraltarian society was wresting some control back from the fortress, from the governor, that at that time there were no elections or anything like that. So I think it's, if you like, where sort of the democracy that we now see was born.
I would also like just to pay homage very briefly to Huart's role after the Spanish Civil War, because one of the things that's little known about the TNG and about Huart personally is that he sacrificed quite a lot of political capital in Gibraltar in the years after the Civil War, defending those Republican refugees who were still left in Gibraltar. And let's remember that many of those Republican refugees working as dockyard workers during the Second World War continued the struggle against fascism and played an important role in Gibraltar, serving as an effective naval base during the Second World War. Huart fought for these people after 1945 to try and give them the right to remain in Gibraltar. And as everyone in this room will know, housing was at a premium in Gibraltar after 1945. There was a desperate rush to get people back from the evacuation. It wasn't a popular thing for Huart to do in 1945, but his commitment to these Republicans remained unwavering.
Agustin was a man very much committed to trade unionism, and a man who took sides from an early involvement in the Spanish Civil War. His role was not only in respect to Gibraltar. There are numerous correspondences between him and the Labour Party and the trade union movement in UK, because he challenged UK's role in what they call the non-intervention policy. Because from his perspective, Britain's role was not one of intervention, they actually were involved in allowing the establishment to favour the nationalists or the fascists in Spain.
The non-intervention policy that was initially thought up by the British government, which was a very conservative British government in 1936, and indeed for the whole duration of the Spanish Civil War, and was then picked up by the French government as well, was effectively a covert way of supporting the military rebels. So in a way, although when talking about foreign intervention and foreign help for Franco, much emphasis is put on the role played by German Nazism and Italian fascism, the covert role played by British non-intervention and its influence on France is absolutely crucial, because British non-intervention, or Anglo-French non-intervention, prevented the Spanish Republic from defending itself. It effectively prevented the Spanish Republic using its financial resources to buy arms, and of course it facilitated the intervention of the Germans and the Italians.
No actions were to be taken by Great Britain to either help the nationalist side or the Republican side. Now this in many respects was a farce in and of itself, because by not intervening at all, the UK government was effectively helping the nationalist side, which was the side that had all the resources put at its disposal by the Axis powers, Germany and Italy at the time.
The governor, backed by the British government, the military authorities on the Rock, the colonial authorities, the wealthy and the well-to-do families, many members of the business community and the established church, they all favored and backed the Franco-fascist forces. There is, in fact, documentary evidence that just before the uprising of 18th of July 1936, the governor of the day allowed a group of very high-ranking officers who were involved in the conspiracy with Franco. He allowed them to pass the land frontier, come into Gibraltar, and they were allowed access into the military communication center. From there they made direct telephone contact with Hitler in Germany and with Benito Mussolini in Italy in order to enlist their active and material support in the war. And there is documentary evidence too that some prominent members of the business community gave active and material help to the Franco forces. So much for the non-intervention policy.
So while Huart was going on a tour of the Republican zone, Bishop Fitzgerald was going on a tour of the rebel zone, and again trying to rally support for the Francoist cause and to find out what was going on in the rebel zone. The tour culminated in the summer of 1937 with an open letter that Fitzgerald penned, which was then published in the Francoist press, and which was read out one evening by the infamous Radio General of Seville, Capo de Llano. For Fitzgerald, and I'm quoting here, the Spanish Civil War was not a fight of democracy versus fascism, but of European civilization against Soviet barbarism.
The Gibraltarian population was largely pro-Republican, because that was considered a legitimate government. There was a section of people who were strongly attached to the church, who welcomed Franco because there had, in the years of the Republic, been a number of attacks on churches and priests and nuns. So naturally they welcomed anything which would restore peace. The military and the navy, of course, were on the side of the generals and admirals who had started the revolution.
On the other hand, we have the attitude and the acts of ordinary working class population in Gibraltar. Now, that was a different kettle of fish. They opened their arms to the victims of the war and to the refugees. They showed compassion, they showed sympathy, without any prompting whatsoever. They opened their arms, they gave all kinds of help. They opened their homes to give them sanctuary. I can honestly say I feel very proud of that.
Some of the tidbits that I've seen already are fascinating. Some of the names of people who fought, who were Gibraltarian, who lost their lives, are names that I would not have thought I could associate with those events.
There's a lot of information that suggests that Gibraltarians actually went to fight in Spain. We're not talking about hundreds of people, but certainly You know, people did go to fight in Spain on one side or the other, and there's very little documentary evidence about this, so it'd be interesting to know what the local sort of historical memory is of those people. But I do know of one or two cases of Gibraltarians who definitely went to fight in Spain. One man called Julio Danino, who had lived in La Línea, but he was a Gibraltarian, was actually killed in the defence of Malaga and was shot in early 1937. There's another guy called Mulchand who actually fought in the Spanish Foreign Legion and therefore found himself in the Franco camp during the Spanish Civil War. So all sorts of personal stories.
Cuando estalló el movimiento el 18 de julio, mi abuelo, por parte de mi padre, decidió de traerse toda su familia a Gibraltar. Estaba casado y tenía un niño de 2 o 3 años en la línea. Y la mujer no quiso venirse para Gibraltar porque cuidaba a su madre. Entonces, mi tío Alfredo, cuando se normalizó la cuestión en la frontera después del conflicto, bueno, durante los primeros días del conflicto, iba para allá todos los días a visitar a su mujer y a su hijo y tratar de convencerlos para venirse. Y todos los días venía para atrás con historias que en verdad venía muy conmovido, ¿no? Por ejemplo, él contaba de que había visto un grupo de mujeres que la sacaron de la comandancia militar en la línea, en paños menores, con la cabeza rapada, le habían dado purgante de aceite castol y haciéndose todas sus necesidades por la calle, la llevaban por la calle, la gente gritándole y metiéndose con ella, ¿no? Y entonces venía él muy con el cuerpo malo de esas cosas, ¿no? También contaba, por ejemplo, de que había muchas mujeres que habían perdido o sus maridos o sus hermanos o un familiar en la guerra e iban a solicitar una pensión o arreglar algunos papeles, arreglar pase para venir a Gibraltar a trabajar. Y entonces le ponía por condición, le ponía un papel por delante que tenía que firmar de que su familiar había muerto de muerte natural. Es decir, no solo habían vencido a la gente, sino que le pisoteaban la dignidad.
Cattle would come in, no frontier fence, on the hoof, with the men on horseback, what they used to call los piconeros, which have these big long wooden lances, and they sort of prod the cattle to keep them going in the same direction.
By the 1930s, there were a considerable number of Gibraltarians living in the Campo as a result of overcrowding on the rock, combined with a very high cost of living. Gibraltarians were not, therefore, passive observers of Spanish politics. Rather, they were active participants.
If you didn't look like a smuggler, they just said, anything to declare, and you said no, and you just were waved through. This changed completely when the Civil War, el levantamiento, started.
Obviously, in the course of the Spanish Civil War, the violence was massive. Everywhere the Francoist forces or the rebel forces took control, the violence was intense. So that there's no doubt. But it was particularly intense in the south. I wouldn't say that the area around the Campo de Gibraltar that immediate area was worse than the rest of the province of Cádiz or the rest of the province of Malaga or the rest of the province of Sevilla. I mean, it was in the middle of those, you know, in a sense, between those three provinces where, in general, the whole, if you like, the plan of action of the military rebels was to carry out as much, impose as much violence as possible to put an end to possible resistance to what they were up to. And the reason was, of course, that the whole agenda of the Republican government for agrarian reform challenged the big landowners in those areas. And so in fact, in the areas that we're talking about, much of the repression, I mean, the initial repression was carried out by the military forces, the military rebels, but it was very quickly taken over by landowners who had a kind of, what it was called la Policía Armada, the armed police. It wasn't, of course, official at all. It was a kind of armed cavalry financed by the big landowners that went from village to village carrying out the most savage repression.
One of the first areas that falls after the Canary Islands is Spanish North Africa, which at the time was much more extensive than it is now. And again, from the documents, we get the idea that my grandfather led part of the section against the insurrectionist generals, against the troops that were sort of rising in the name of a right-wing coup. He is captured very quickly at the start of the war, and these are the papers I haven't been able to get. But what happens almost immediately is that he's put through a military tribunal. The whole of Spanish North Africa was put under martial law immediately. So he doesn't go to a civil tribunal, he goes to a military tribunal, and he is charged with treason against Spain. In all this time, my grandmother doesn't know where he is. So this would have happened in Ceuta or nearby, Tetuan or something like that, and very quickly he is sent to Puerto de Santa Maria. When the north is taken by the fascist forces, so the area of Santander and so forth, he is sent to another prison, which is the prison of Santonia. Santonia is an island off the coast of Santander, off the coast of Cantabria. During the time that he's in prison, my grandfather, this is what he used to say, he was offered to join in 1937 the fascist forces, and he refused to do so. He stayed at least loyal to his ideals, and for that he was marked down in prison as a troublesome prisoner. And you can see through, when you read in the files, that my grandfather was tortured. They kept him X number of days without drinking water, and then they gave him a glass of clear liquid. He drank it down thinking it was water, and it was bleach. So they almost tried to kill him. But my grandfather, after then, was not able to eat solid foods for the rest of his life.
Mi padre no estaba ni mi tío, pero después, muchas horas después, vino mi padre. Dice, mira, ha venido arrastrándome. Dice, para hacerme creer que estaba muerto, como que estarían matando. Dice, y el niño, porque a mi tío le decía el niño, él, dice, parece que sacó una bandera, dice, y la han escondido. Dice, el niño no sabe dónde está. Y ya después nos enteramos que se había metido aquí en Gibraltar.
Y vinieron los falangistas. Y le dicen al hombre, ¿y es rubio? No está, porque era rubio. Mi padre. Dice, no, ha ido a comprar por 2 cafés. Ah, bueno, lo vamos a esperar, porque le vamos a hacer unas preguntas. Y él venía cantiñeando con los 2 cafés, uno en cada mano. Cuando los vio se murió porque sabía lo que había. Y, ¿qué? ¿Cómo estamos? Dice, muy bien. Dice, anda, vente que te vamos a hacer unas preguntas. Eso era el día 3 de octubre del año 36. Y ya cuando llegó el día 7 de octubre, ya no lo vio. Y dice mi madre, ¿cómo que no está aquí? Si yo lo he estado viendo el día 4, 5 y 6. Lo he estado viendo. Su madre y yo. Usted está loca. Aquí no ha estado. Ese señor que usted está hablando. Ese señor es mi marido. Y yo he venido aquí con ella a verlo. Y lo he visto por 3 días. Se lo negaron. Váyase usted de aquí ya, si no quiere usted que la echemos pone. Así le echaron.
Vinieron, picaron a la puerta, serían las 2 o las 3. Dice, mira, Jaime dice que te van a, dice, vienen por ti mañana. Dice, le dio el nombre, no me acuerdo cómo era. Dice, achivateado. Dice, con que cogí y ya me vine yo para acá con mi padre. Y después ya a las 2 horas se vino mi madre con mi hermana. Cogieron una habitación en el patio Carrera, yo me acuerdo, lo último era el patio Carrera. Y de ahí ya se va mi tío a pelear y nos escribía, nos mandó una foto. Mi madre le mandaba ropa, y gente de aquí de Gibraltar, aquí ese Amar, El de Benzín les mandaba llampa, les mandaba ropa. Después lo último que sabemos ya es que ya dejó de escribir y cuando terminó la guerra, un amigo de él que estaba peleando con él llevaba un vaso aquí y nos dijo que lo último que sabía de mi tío que estaba malo con reuma y que se lo llevaran a un hospital.
My grandfather on my mother's side, whose name was Santos Díaz Sánchez, was born in Rio Tinto in Huelva in 1900, when the Franco's African army entered La Línea. His older son, who was 16 years old, got killed. Right? And that same day, he was told by a neighbor who happened to be a phalangist. They didn't know this, but he was told that he was in line to be executed for his political beliefs and because he was a Freemason as well. He didn't want to live. Understandably, his older son has just been killed, at 16 years old. And, but he was convinced. He was hidden away for a couple of days, and then on a rowing boat he was brought to Gibraltar. He was very much involved whilst he was in Gib, obviously with the Freemasonry, and also with the Socorro Rojo, which was an international organization, right, to help people, Republicans, Lefuengas, etc., who were imprisoned, to help their families, people imprisoned or killed or fighting the war somewhere else. And that Socorro Rojo, that money that was raised in Gib, was then delivered, I don't know how, obviously, but it was delivered to his house in La Línea. And my mother, who was 14 years old at the time, she actually used to take it round to different houses. And she used to tell me that she used to knock at night on the door and put the envelope under the door, obviously to help these families.
Mi tío tenía la fatalidad que bebía y cuando bebía perdía el control. Y entonces en el bar empezó allá por esa boca contra Franco, contra la Guardia Civil, contra los fascistas. No vea, se despachó bien. Y dentro del local había uno de Gibraltar, según nos han contado después, se enteró la familia, uno de Gibraltar que era chivato de la policía. Y él se salió del bar y vino de vuelta con un destacamento de la Guardia Civil. Pues la familia en España dio todos los pasos que tuvo que dar, fue a la comandancia militar, a la comisaría, al retén, al hospital, a todas las oficinas de gobierno, lo mandaron a Algeciras, a la prisión de Algeciras, allí no sabían nada. Y al día siguiente, cuando regresaron, pues un conocido mandó aviso a la familia allí en La Línea de que no lo buscaran más, que lo habían sacado de la prisión o donde estaba en La Línea detenido, lo habían sacado con un grupo de 20 presos, lo habían metido en un camión, lo habían llevado al cementerio y lo habían fusilado. Lo habían echado en una fosa, me habían echado cal y ahí se acabó todo. Yo creo que tiene que ser uno de los pocos llanitos, uno de los pocos gibraltareños que fueron fusilados en la guerra sin haber pertenecido a nada.
My father was in the ferry La Línea because it happened in July, and under the guise of the la traca is like a string of bangers which they put when they inaugurate a fair in Spain. They always start with all these bangers making a hell of a lot of noise, and the troops use that as a camouflage to start shooting people.
You can imagine, I mean, loads of people going to the fair, and then suddenly there's shootings, gunfights, and I remember my grandmother telling me how she literally ran, no?
Lo primero que tenemos que pensar es que Gibraltar va a servir como lugar de refugio de aproximadamente entre 5.000 y 8.000 republicanos, sobre todo, del campo de Gibraltar, de otras poblaciones, pero del campo de Gibraltar. Al principio también es evidente que, que el gobierno gibraltareño va a atraer a ciudadanos británicos de las distintas zonas de Andalucía donde tenían intereses, Río Tinto, Costa del Sol, Jerez. Pero el gran grueso de los refugiados van a ser republicanos que huyen de los primeros disturbios y de los primeros fusilamientos que hay en la comarca. En Gibraltar se van a concentrar en las primeras semanas del golpe de Estado aproximadamente sobre 5.000 refugiados. Al principio va a ser un problema muy importante para las autoridades gibraltareñas. El 22 de julio ya se empieza a hablar y se construye el que conocemos todos como el campo de refugiados en la zona donde hoy está el aeropuerto. Ese campo de refugiados va a durar unas 7 semanas aproximadamente. Las autoridades de Gibraltar van a presionar para que esos refugiados vayan saliendo en barco de Gibraltar hacia zonas de dominio republicano en esos momentos, como Málaga, posteriormente Valencia, Barcelona, Marsella.
In the first days and weeks of the Civil War, there could have been up to 10,000 people from the Spanish side of the frontier taking refuge in Gibraltar. Though it is hard to know the exact figure, I've seen 5,000 as well being given out as the maximum. We don't know.
About 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I think it must have been, rowing boats started arriving from La Tunara and people coming ashore, and the rowing boats went back and came back again. These were people who could not get through the frontier because the frontier was virtually closed in order to stop a big influx of refugees. So they paid the fishermen to row them over. And within minutes, the beach was suddenly full of people.
Within days, it's been quoted that over 5,000 people seeking asylum presented themselves at the frontier. So you can imagine the huge task that was. You had 5,000 people to log down, to see who they were, what could be done for them.
In my own bed and in my brother's bed, and we had refugees all over the place, sleeping on the floor, in the halls, wherever there was available space.
Amongst these refugees were a good number of Republican sympathisers. And once the camp had been secured by the rebels, it was the presence of left-wing sympathisers which prompted the rebel authorities to close the frontier. In essence, the rebel authorities wanted to force the colonial authorities in Gibraltar to refuse refuge to Republican sympathisers, who could then go on to use the rock as a base from which to operate in Spain. Given the pro-rebel sympathies of the colonial authorities, this was, as they say, pushing on an open door. Camps housing refugees were closed down, and an ordinance outlawing the harbouring of refugees was issued by the colonial government, sometimes referred to as the Impartiality Ordinance, a phrase which my colleague and friend Gareth Socky coined in his book. Nevertheless, there were ultimately around 500 refugees who could not return to Spain because it was clear that they would either be imprisoned or, more likely, killed by the new regime there.
If the Spanish Republican refugees who had found help in Gibraltar and been welcomed by families from Gibraltar, if they had returned, there's little doubt that their fate would have been the same as left-wingers who had also gone into exile in France, or indeed there were, at the end of the war, some had gone into exile in North Africa. What they would face at best would have been concentration camps, prisons with unbelievably insanitary conditions, but most likely execution.
Hombre, yo entiendo que con todo, digamos, con toda la historia recuperada en este momento, se ve que ahí se crearon unos lazos de unión, propiamente de habitantes que antes del golpe de Estado, pues, digamos, había lazos familiares, había lazos comerciales, había lazos laborales también, y de otra índole, que se tradujeron en esa solidaridad y demás. Yo creo que eso hasta nuestros días, aunque hubo 40 años después de plena dictadura y demás, con lo que fue el cierre de la verja también, yo creo que esos lazos de unión permanecieron, y yo creo que entre la población gibraltareña y la de la comarca, yo creo que eso se mantuvo, y porque no hay que olvidar la importancia que tuvo ese apoyo solidario del pueblo gibraltareño a aquellos refugiados que venían huyendo de aquella atrocidad, ¿no?
And don't forget that Gibraltarians actually faced prosecution for doing so. There was a very strict permit system in place in Gibraltar, had been for years by the 1930s, which regulated your right of residence in Gibraltar. And yes, you had this influx of possibly as many as 10,000 Republican refugees at the start of the Civil War, but as you say, they closed the camps. They ordered most of these refugees to leave Gibraltar, and local families, because they had so many ties, friendships, family ties, often business ties with people in the campo, frankly defied the orders of the British authorities and simply said, no, we're going to help these people. So, hiding them out in already overcrowded houses, frankly, and doing what they could to help these refugees. And around a dozen of them were actually fined very heavily for doing this, and many others who weren't recorded, nonetheless, were prepared to take that risk. It's really fascinating.
Calculamos entre 5.000 y 8.000 refugiados que llegan a Gibraltar, pues lógicamente van a cambiar en estos primeros días y meses de la sublevación, van a cambiar el ritmo diario de Gibraltar. Las relaciones ideológicas que se van a crear entre los refugiados y sobre todo el sindicato, la Trade Union de Gibraltar, van a ser muy estrechas. Incluso sindicalistas históricos de Gibraltar, pues algunas de sus memorias han dicho que bebieron de las fuentes sindicales de esos refugiados.
Most of them left relatives behind, and my mother used to go over at her own risk to try and get them for them.
Mr. Mesilio, Francisco Mesilio, used to go by rowing boat into the sea between Algeciras and Gibraltar, into the straits, and this was obviously under cover of darkness with no lights, and pick out of the sea those who were injured, who could be soldiers with bullet wounds, or people who were escaping and had gone into the sea to try to swim to Gibraltar. He used to pick them up and take them to his flat in Willis's Road. And there, at any given time, you could have 20, 30, even 40.
To finish, we come full circle. 20 years ago, our knowledge of Gibraltar's experience of the Spanish Civil War was very limited. Today, we know considerably more. However, as I've hinted at, we have only really scratched the surface. The release of new files to the National Archives in London offers hope of further insights, and so too does the discovery of substantial archival holdings in towns and villages all around the Campo and further afield in the rest of Andalusia. We might also hope that local Gibraltarian collections of documents may eventually make their way into the archives too. What we do know is that Gibraltar had a rich and exciting experience of the Spanish Civil War, one which we should investigate further in the future, and one which we should commemorate today in the present.
It's made us stronger, without any shadow of a doubt. We are very strong as a people, as a result of everything that we've witnessed, everything we've gone through, all the battering we get from left, right and centre. That has made us very strong. There's no question about it.
Viva la quinta brigada, rumba la rumba la rumba la. Viva la quinta brigada, rumba la rumba la rumba la. Que sea cubierta de gloria, ay Manuela, ay Manuela. Que sea cubierta de gloria, ay Manuela, ay Manuela.
I'm not entirely sure if there are lessons to be learned from the Spanish Civil War, because it would be difficult to see a similar situation arising in the sense that what happened in Spain happened for for two, I mean, in a way it was possible for two reasons. One, because there was the existence of two states, if you like, two rogue states, which was Nazi Germany and fascist Italy, which were keen to upset the international balance of power. The reason they helped Franco was because what they wanted to do was undermine British and French hegemony of international relations. Now, there isn't an obvious equivalent of that today, and the other reason was, of course, that Spain itself was bitterly divided for the reasons that I explained earlier on about the, if you like, the many challenges that the Republic put up against the economic and social establishment within Spain. Now again, a Spain that's part of the European Union, you know, neither is there an equivalent of the aggression of Hitler and Mussolini, nor is there the bitter social division in Spain that there was then. If one wanted to widen it out, I mean, you'd have to say the best lesson would be not have a conservative government in Britain.